Most analysis of the Yemen war asks the same question: why couldn't Saudi Arabia win? It is a reasonable question, but it is the wrong one. Winning or losing a war is a measurable outcome. Historians can debate it, governments can spin it, but what the Yemen conflict actually produced was something harder to manage and far more strategically significant than a battlefield result. It produced a detailed, public and largely unambiguous portrait of where Saudi power ends and Saudi weakness begins. Before 2015, Saudi Arabia had spent decades constructing a very specific image: oil-rich and politically stable, militarily capable. A regional hegemon whose influence stretched across the Gulf and whose vast arms purchases suggested independent strategic reach. That image was carefully maintained, enormously expensive and widely accepted. Then Yemen's stress tested every part of it. The Houthis did not simply resist Saudi power. They exposed it in real time in front of every government intelligence agency and rival power that had strategic reasons to want an accurate answer to one question. What is Saudi Arabia actually capable of? Most people are still debating who won in Yemen, but the governments in Tehran, Beijing and Washington moved past that question long ago. They are asking something more useful. What does Yemen tell us about what Saudi Arabia actually is, and what does that knowledge now make possible? That is what this documentary is about. By 2015, Saudi Arabia had built something that went beyond military capability or oil wealth. It had built an identity, and in geopolitics, identity carries its own form of strategic weight. Riyadh positioned itself as the indispensable anchor of Gulf security, the custodian of Sunni Islamic legitimacy, and the energy supplier the global economy simply could not replace. Decades of American arms purchases, F-15, Patriot batteries, precision munitions suggested a military that had graduated from dependence to genuine independent capability. Then Mohammed bin Salman accelerated the narrative further. Vision 2030 promised economic transformation. The Islamic Military Counter-Terrorism Coalition announced regional leadership ambition. Operation Decisive Storm, launched in March 2015, was meant to be military punctuation on all of it, proof that Riyadh could assemble a coalition project force and shape its strategic environment without waiting for Washington's lead. The larger the claim a state makes about its own power, the more damaging the exposure. When reality contradicts it, Saudi Arabia had made extraordinarily large claims. Yemen was about to answer them precisely, publicly and permanently. To understand why Yemen's exposure cut so deep, you have to understand something that defense analysts had observed for decades, but that rarely entered public discussion. Saudi Arabia had a procurement strategy. What it never fully developed was a military institution. Since the oil boom of the 1970s, the kingdom purchased some of the most sophisticated weapon systems on the planet: F-15 fighter jets, Patriot missile defense batteries, Abrams tanks. The procurement budget was extraordinary. But buying advanced equipment and building the institutional capacity to use it effectively are two entirely different things. Saudi Arabia consistently achieved the first while systematically underdeveloping the second. This was not an oversight. It was a structural choice rooted in political survival. The Al Saud ruling family had learned from regional history that powerful independent military institutions could become threats to civilian authority. Across the Arab world, military coups had toppled governments. The solution Riyadh adopted was to keep the armed forces politically reliable by keeping them institutionally fragmented, never allowing any single service branch commander or military structure to accumulate enough organizational autonomy to become dangerous. The consequence was an army built for loyalty rather than lethality. Non-commissioned officer development, the backbone of any effective fighting force, remained chronically underdeveloped. Joint operations doctrine barely existed. independent logistics capacity was limited. The Gulf War of 1990 had already hinted at this reality when the defense of Saudi territory required an overwhelming American operational presence to function at all, but oil wealth and alliance structures had insulated that reality from serious scrutiny. The weapons were world-class. The institution built to use them was never permitted to fully become one. Yemen would make that distinction impossible to ignore any longer. Story Yemen did not expose one Saudi weakness. It exposed four simultaneously publicly and in enough operational detail to permanently alter how the region's power structure was understood. The first was military effectiveness. Saudi Arabia entered Yemen with total air superiority and a coalition spanning 9 nations. Neither advantage produced ground control. Houthi forces continued operating, advancing, and most significantly striking back ballistic missiles and drones crossed into Saudi territory repeatedly. The Patriot batteries designed to stop them produced mixed results at best. And in September 2019, the Aramco facilities at Abqaiq and Khurais were struck in an attack that temporarily removed approximately 5% of global oil supply from the market in a single day. For a country whose entire strategic identity rested on energy reliability, that was not simply an infrastructure problem, it was a credibility catastrophe. And the second weakness was intelligence. The Houthi drone and missile program did not materialize overnight. It developed over years under coalition surveillance within a theatre where Saudi Arabia and its partners maintained extensive monitoring assets. That the program reached operational maturity without generating an effective countermeasure pointed towards something more troubling than a single intelligence failure. It suggested systemic gaps in both collection and institutional response. The third weakness was economic concentration. The Aramco strikes gave energy markets, foreign investors and rival governments precise empirical knowledge of something they had previously only theorized, that Saudi Arabia's economic foundation rested on infrastructure that was geographically narrow and operationally exposed. That knowledge did not disappear when the fires were extinguished. The fourth weakness was the most consequential and the least discussed. The war revealed that Saudi Arabia's increasingly centralized decision-making structure lacked, the institutional mechanisms to correct a failing strategy without political cost to its leadership. Wars require adaptation. Adaptation requires the ability to acknowledge error. That capacity was structurally constrained in ways Yemen made unmistakably visible. These were not conclusions drawn from think tank assessments. They were live demonstrations watched in real time by every government with strategic reasons to know exactly where Saudi power ended. What Yemen revealed did not stay in Yemen. It traveled to foreign ministries, intelligence agencies, and strategic planning offices across the region and beyond, and it changed calculations that had been settled for decades. Iran's shift was the most immediate. Tehran had long treated direct confrontation with Saudi Arabia as carrying unacceptable escalation risk. Yemen rewrote that assumption entirely. The conflict demonstrated that devastating pressure could be applied through proxy forces at manageable cost with Saudi Arabia, absorbing the financial, reputational and military damage, while Iran maintained enough distance to deny direct responsibility. That is not a tactical lesson, it is a strategic doctrine, and Tehran absorbed it completely. The UAE drew different but equally significant conclusions. Abu Dhabi had watched the same campaign from inside the coalition and determined that Saudi-led collective security was an insufficient foundation for its own strategic interests. The result was an accelerating Emirati foreign policy, independence, separate diplomatic tracks, separate military relationships, separate regional ambitions that would have been far more difficult to justify. And before Yemen demonstrated the limits of Riyadh's operational leadership. For China and Russia, the conflict offered something with implications extending well beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Years of observing American-supplied weapon systems performing under real combat conditions. Patriot batteries, precision munitions, coalition coordination frameworks produce granular operational intelligence that no exercise or assessment could replicate. And within Saudi Arabia itself, the Aramco strikes created pressure that Vision 2030 was partly constructed to address. Diversifying the economy away from oil dependency was always presented as forward-looking ambition. It was also in part a structural response to what September 2019 had made impossible to ignore. The most significant audience for what Yemen revealed was never in Sana'a or Riyadh. It was in the capitals of every power, now recalculating what Saudi Arabia was worth as an ally and what it cost as an adversary. Saudi Arabia now operates in a strategic environment that its pre-2015 planning assumptions never anticipated. And the question is not whether Riyadh understands this. The question is which response it is actually capable of executing. Four pathways are available. The first is genuine military reform, moving beyond procurement toward professionalization, building the non-commissioned officer infrastructure and joint operations doctrine that battlefield effectiveness actually requires. It is the most strategically necessary option, and given the Al Saud's deliberate constraints on military institutional development, historically the most difficult to execute without creating the political risks that those constraints were designed to prevent. The second is economic transformation through Vision 2030, reducing the concentrated infrastructure vulnerability the Aramco strikes made globally visible. And progress exists, but ambition and structural change are different things, and the timeline between them remains wide. The third is diplomatic repositioning, the Chinese brokered normalization. With Iran and Riyadh's deepening engagement with Beijing represent an attempt to construct strategic relationships that do not require Saudi Arabia to demonstrate military credibility. It currently cannot guarantee influence through economic partnership rather than deterrence through demonstrated force. The fourth path is the most dangerous and the most tempting: image reconstruction without structural reform, projecting recovered confidence through investment summits, diplomatic announcements, and media narratives, while leaving the underlying weaknesses unaddressed. The hardest thing for any state after public exposure is not rebuilding capability, it is rebuilding credibility. And credibility, unlike weapons, systems cannot simply be purchased. The Houthis did not set out to conduct a strategic audit of Saudi Arabia, but that is precisely what one conflict produced. What Yemen exposed was not simply military underperformance or economic vulnerability or political rigidity in isolation. It was the accumulated gap between projected power and structural reality, a gap that had been building inside Saudi Arabia for decades. Protected by oil wealth, American security guarantees, and careful image management. Yemen removed that protection publicly, permanently. Every government, every intelligence service, and every regional actor now operates with a more accurate map of where Saudi power actually ends. That cannot be undone by a ceasefire, a normalization agreement, or a progress report on economic diversification. The strategic record that Yemen created is fixed, but the deeper question the conflict leaves behind extends beyond Saudi Arabia entirely. In an era of real-time warfare, global observation, and conflicts that function as live intelligence operations, how long can any state sustain a strategic identity built on projected power rather than demonstrated capability? Yemen did not create that question, it simply answered it in one country's case in front of an audience that was paying very close attention. And that audience has not stopped watching.